and welcome to this 12-hour edition of Practical Ethical Hacking. My name is Heath Adams, and I'm going to be your instructor for this course. A really quick who am I? I am a husband, ethical hacker, teacher, and when I have time, gamer, sports fan, and animal dad. I am the business owner at TCM Security. We are a cybersecurity consulting and education firm. I do what is called ethical hacking, meaning companies pay us to attempt to break into them. It could be through a network, wireless network, a web application, even physical pen testing like a building. Anything that they want us to try to hack into, we're happy to do it. And there's careers out here that involve ethical hacking. It's actually a booming industry right now. And a lot of people are coming into this. For example, I was an accountant and I ended up in this industry, and I've seen doctors, dentists, lawyers, all kinds of random backgrounds that have just come to this industry and found homes here. So if you're interested in ethical hacking, this course is designed for you to kind of brush you into the basics, help you understand what an ethical hacker does and some of the techniques, and it's going to be all hands-on. I am not a PowerPoint person whatsoever, so this is the little bit of PowerPoint that you're going to get at the beginning of the course, and then we're going to get into heavy hands-on techniques. So if you're interested in finding more out about me, I am very approachable. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, here on YouTube. I would love if you hit the subscribe button, comment, hit the like, let me know how you enjoyed the course. And of course, you can find me on Twitch as well. We do live streaming, some ethical hacking streams, some Q&A, et cetera, et cetera. Down below, you see sites. TCM Security is the consulting side of the business. The academy is the educational side, and the certification side is the certification side. So I'm going to cover that really quick and what this course is and what we're going to do in this course. Okay, so welcome to Practical Ethical Hacking. This is 12 hours of 25 hours of a course. So full disclosure, this is not the complete course, though this is a course that takes you through the first half and gets you to a good stopping point. So reviewing the curriculum, I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to link everything in the description as well. We're going to cover a few things in this course. We're going to talk about note keeping. We're going to go over computer networking and also Python. So if you've never used Python or if you've never done anything with computer networking, we're going to kind of cover that. And so we'll cover some of the foundational skills before we get into ethical hacking. And that does include note keeping and setting up a lab and installing Linux and running through Linux as well. So we built all the foundations in this course before we start getting into ethical hacking. So once we get through Linux and Python and we get through our computer networking, we start getting into the ethical hacker methodology. We talk about the 5 stages of ethical hacking, and then we start getting into information gathering. What information can we gather about our target? We can look at social media. We can look at finding email addresses, finding intelligence about these companies or individuals or whoever it is that we are paid to target. And we'll do that through information gathering and reconnaissance. There's a bunch of different techniques that we can do. Then we'll move into the next phase, which is scanning and enumeration. We're going to have a intentionally vulnerable machine that's presented to us. We're going to scan that with tools that you learn throughout the course, identify what vulnerabilities might exist within the machine, and then we're going to eventually start hacking it. So we'll get into exploitation and talk about how we can hack a machine, understand the basics of exploitation, and then eventually hack a machine. Once that has all been said and done, we're going to go ahead and move into a capstone. So we have 4 to 5 boxes, actually 5 boxes that we have built ourselves, and we allow you to download those, you run through those, and you try to attack those. And your goal is to hack into these machines. So you go through all these, and that is your capstone, your end to your 12 hours of your course. Now, this is the only time I'm going to try to sell you anything is going to be the next 30 seconds to a minute. If you are interested in continuing on with the course, it does cover exploit development, Active Directory, which is probably the coolest thing ever. It's my favorite thing to teach, and how to hack into Active Directory, which you can see there's a lot of Active Directory attacks here. We go into post-exploitation, we go into web application enumeration and the OWASP top 10 web application attacks. We do a little bit of wireless pen testing, legal documentation, report writing, and career advice. And we do sell all of our courses for $30. Full disclosure, we have about 12 courses at the time of this recording. If we go to the homepage, we could see all of our courses here. So we've got everything from Linux and Python all the way down to open source intelligence, different types of pen testing and advanced pen testing, mobile pen testing, malware analysis, phishing. Everything is no more than $30. And that is the only time I'm going to sell you on anything again. So last but not least, we do have a certification side of things. If you're interested in the certification, this course, it leads to the practical network penetration tester certification. If you want to find out more about that and why that's cool and industry changing, feel free to go to certifications.tcm-sec.com. And with that being said, I am done pitching you, selling you anything for the rest of this time being. Let's get into 12 hours of free material and start covering how to become an ethical hacker. Let's go ahead and get this course started. Before we dive into this course, I want to talk about a day in the life of an ethical hacker. And I want to talk about why I love ethical hacking or penetration testing and what I do on a day-to-day basis, what kind of engagements you might find yourself in as an ethical hacker, and then the soft skills and technical skills I think that you should have in order to be successful in this field. So let's go ahead and first look at why pen testing. So why pen testing? Why for me? Well, I work from home. I roll out of bed at like 7:55 in the morning. I'll get my coffee ready. I'll go to my desk. I'll make it there by 8. And I am ready to go. I don't have to sit in traffic. I don't have to drive to work. I save so much time out of my life just by working from home. It's a great luxury. I love the lifestyle. It's not for everybody, but a lot of penetration testing nowadays is working from home. And another great thing about pen testing is the salaries are incredibly high. My first job in the field was over 6 figures, meaning over $100,000 in this field as a first year pen tester. So it's incredible money, and it's very lucrative moving up. Anywhere from a senior pen tester can make $150,000. A manager can make somewhere around $170,000 to $200,000. And really the sky's the limit, especially if you go out and you do your own business or your own consulting. The salaries are very, very high because this is a very technical field, and there is a job shortage or people shortage right now. We have more jobs than we have people, so that relates to high salaries as well. On top of that, the benefits are great. The work-life balance is great. Again, this boils down to where you work, but for me personally, I'm working 40-hour weeks. My benefits have been fantastic through and through. And I love the lifestyle, right? That work from home, that 40 hours a week. I was an accountant before I got into penetration testing. And let me tell you, I was working 60-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks. I was in the office all the time. And I was going in when it was dark and I was coming home when it was dark. And it just, can easily lead to depression doing that. I've not experienced any of that in penetration testing, and I'm really, really happy for it. So on top of all this, it is mentally stimulating. This is one of the best fields. I am what I consider a lifelong learner. I like to learn. I'm nonstop learning, right? And I have that personality type, and you're going to find that if you enjoy this field, it's never going to feel like work to you. I could sit here and I can pen test for 80 hours and it never feels like work to me. It is just mentally stimulating. It's a puzzle. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new attack out, and there's always a new defense out as well. So somebody's always trying to block your attacks, and it's this cat and mouse game. And if you do not stay up to date or on top of things, you're going to get left behind. So you have to have that mentality in this field where you're always willing to learn and you like learning. And that's really, like, for me, that's a positive to pen testing because I enjoy that. And lastly, of course, it's legal breaking and entering. Who doesn't like that? I get to break into buildings. I get to break into websites, into networks, and people pay me to do it. I cannot believe that this is a job. When I first heard about it, I was like, no way. Hackers are bad guys, right? But hackers can be good guys too, and we can get paid very lucrative salaries. So from here, let's talk about a day-to-day lifestyle. So day-to-day here, what's guaranteed, most basically should be guaranteed, is that I roll out of bed. I'm still relatively young, and I have several different types of assessments that I can do. And this really isn't all of them, but this is the ones that I do the most. Now, I have what is an external or internal network assessment, and we're going to cover those quite a bit in this course. But when we're talking external network assessment, that means that I'm evaluating a network from the outside. I could be in China, I can be in the United States, I could be in Russia. It doesn't matter where I'm attacking from, right? I could be in any country at any time attacking this network. So I'm on the outside looking in. The internal is different. We assume at this point that we have breached the network. We have a Dropbox. We've got some sort of code execution on their network. We logged into their VPN. It doesn't matter. Somehow, some way, we're on that network. What can we do once we're inside the network? And what that means is we're going to be talking a lot about Active Directory pen testing, and that's really what it corresponds to. And this course is going to hit very, very heavy on Active Directory because of this. And so you have two different types of network pen tests, and the methodology is very similar. The attacks and tool sets are very different. So they can almost be split apart into their own subsections. But you will have external pen tests, internal pen tests on the network side. You may be asked to do web application penetration testing. So that is assessing a website, right? You have a website or an application that is given to you, and you want to see if you can break that website, if you can log in as an administrator or get somewhere that you shouldn't be able to get to, and you just want to evaluate the security posture of that website. So there are a lot of tools and methodologies out there for that, and we're going to cover the OWASP top 10 in this course when we talk about that, which is big when it comes to testing web applications. So from there, we also have what is called wireless penetration testing. That is the evaluation of a wireless network. So we'll go on site, we'll try to hack into the wireless, we'll look at the guest network and see if there's any segmentation or not. Should a guest be able to sign in and access the same network that somebody who is logged in as an employee should access? The answer is no, but it happens quite a bit. We'll also look for rogue devices and see, what might be out there that is interesting to us. Well, we'll talk more about all these different assessments when we get into their respective sections. Now, there's also what is called physical or social or phishing. There are three different types, but they fall into social engineering. Now, physical assessment is where you go on site and you try to break into a building. You have a destination in mind. Maybe it's a server closet or some critical location in the building that they don't want you to get into. This could involve picking locks, social engineering a lot of the time, cloning badges, and just making your way into this building through whatever methodology you can. Now, social engineering and phishing, those are, kind of hand in hand. You'll do a phishing campaign or social engineering campaign, or even a vishing where you're calling on the phone and you're trying to get information. And you're just after, what kind of credentials can I get? Who clicks on my links? What kind of passwords do I get, etc. We also have what is called SOC assessment. So a SOC assessment is also known as purple teaming. And purple teaming is when you combine red and blue. So as a penetration tester or ethical hacker, you're often known as red, and a defender is often known as blue. So you combine those and that makes purple. And what that means is we'll sit down with a blue team as an offensive team. We'll sit down with a blue team and we'll say, hey, what attacks do you want us to try to run? Or we're going to run these attacks, and I want to know if you pick it up. So I might run a specific attack and see if the blue team detects it. I might go plug into their network and see if it prevents me from plugging into their network. Do they get an alert on that? If not, how can we help them baseline this attack to get this alert? So I think purple teaming assessments are some of the best assessments that are out there, because not only do they learn from you and what attacks are out there, but you learn from them on how to defend against these and how to bypass these too, because maybe your first attempt does get blocked and you're like, hey, maybe I should, run a different attack and see if you catch that. And it's a great way to have that cat and mouse game again. So once we do these types of assessments, we have to write a report. We have to report back on what we saw and tell the client about it. And I put a little sad face there because not everybody likes writing reports, but it is absolutely part of the job. You have to be well written in this field to be successful. So, you write this report and you're going to have to present this report to a client. And that's what is the debrief. Now, a debrief is where you take the report and you give it to a client and you walk through it with the client and say, here's what's wrong, here's why it's wrong, and here's how we can fix that for you. Or here's how you can fix that, right? And so you have to have this technical skill set as a penetration tester, and you have to have this well-written skill set. You have to be able to write well. You also have to be able to talk in front of people when it comes to doing debriefs and talk. An extrovert by any means. You can be an introvert. I am very introverted, but you have to be able to put that personality on when you're on site. Same thing with the physicals, by the way. If you're on site for a physical, you do not have to be an extrovert to be successful. I know plenty of good physical pen testers that are actually introverts and do just fine as long as you're able to get into that mindset for that temporary time period. So anywhere from all these different assessments that you could end up doing at any given time, you have to be well-rounded there. You're going to be writing reports and you're going to be presenting reports to clients. Now let's talk about the technical skills that you are going to need. And our course here is going to cover a lot of these. So at a base level, you really do need to know Linux, preferably Kali Linux, or what another type was called Parrot. There is networking that you should know. You should be familiar with the OSI model, certain protocols like TCP, UDP, HTTP, etc. You should have good scripting skills, whether it be Python scripting or Bash scripting, etc. there. And you should have a solid hacking methodology. And this is all what we would want as a base for an interview. You should have also tool familiarity, right? Metasploit, Burp Suite, Nessus. If all this sounds like a foreign language to you, that's fine. Come back and watch this video again once you've gone through the whole course, and it's going to all click for you. And you're going to say, hey, I know a lot of this. And on the preferred side, Active Directory is huge. If you know Active Directory, you're going to be ahead of the game. Most people, when I interview them, they have a good base, but they don't have that good preferred side. And we like the preferred column a lot, okay? So Active Directory, super important. Wireless attacks, important to know. The OWASP top 10, also important to know. That is related to web application penetration testing. And lastly, coding skills. So scripting and coding, a little bit different. Scripting is what you'll be using primarily. Coding, you don't have to be a coder to be successful in this field at all, by the way. If you only script for the rest of your life in this field, you'll still find plenty of success. However, you can code new tools, things, contribute to the community with it. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. But just know that the base is potentially can get you into a job. The preferred will definitely get you into a job if you have strong knowledge on that side, along with the base knowledge. Lastly, something that is not covered much is the soft skills that you need to be a pen tester. So yeah, it's great to be technical. And we already talked about the social people skills, right? Because you're going to be doing that debriefing. You might be doing social engineering, etc. And you're going to have that well-written ability to you as well. But let's talk about some of these other ones. You need a strong desire to learn. You should be the type of person or that personality type that always wants to learn. And we talked about it, right? Where you should be the guy or girl that wants to go home and study, and you find this fascinating, and that desire to learn is going to benefit you because of that cat and mouse game, because something that you knew yesterday might not be an exploit today. Patches are coming out all the time, and you have to stay ahead of the game because of this cat and mouse game. So that strong desire to learn, super important. If you do not stick up with your studies, you're going to get left behind. And most people have this desire to be in the field of ethical hacking because they think it's sexy, it sounds cool, and it is cool. But if you do not have that desire to learn, you do not have that perseverance, which we're going to talk about, you're going to get left behind in this field and you're not going to be successful. So let's move over to perseverance. you have to have this perseverance mindset, not with just that desire to learn, but also that ability to not give up, because the answer is not always there in front of you. And you're going to see this as we go through the course. It's not cut and dry. It's not, hey, I scan for this, I see an exploit, I go exploit it. You might have to do a lot of research. It might look like the machine that you're attacking, it has no exploits available to it. And you have to be able to put in that persistence to be able to persevere. You have to have that mindset where I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying at this until I have exhausted all my potential resources. That is what makes a good hacker. Okay, that mindset of I'm not going to quit really makes a good hacker. Now, on top of that, non-complacency. This kind of falls into that strong desire to learn. Now, I've had coworkers that are completely happy. When I was working help desk, when I was working in networking, plenty of coworkers who are happy with their jobs. They've been in the same position for 5 years, 10 years. You cannot be that person if you want to be a pen tester. You always want to learn more. You always want to move up. You want the most out of yourself, okay? Don't be complacent. If you're complacent, you're going to get left behind. I'm beating the dead horse here, but it really is true. Like, you're going to get left behind if you're not constantly studying and if you stay complacent. Lastly, you should have a blog or a Twitter or GitHub or something that you contribute back to the community with. It could be a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream or however you want to do it, right? You should give back to the community. When I see that somebody's giving back to the community on their resume, even if it's a blog post or Twitter, whatever, it really helps. And things that you're going to get asked in an interview include where you get your news from, and how do you, do you have a blog? You're going to be asked that, and Twitter is a great place to get news, and a blog's a great place to give back, and Twitter's a great place to give back too. So make sure you're contributing to your community. It'll really help you in the long run. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It could be a blog that somebody's posted before or 20 people have posted before. As long as you're posting it and it helps you learn, and it helps your style might be something that helps somebody else learn as well, compared to the other blog posts where maybe people didn't like that writing style, or they didn't like that, commentary, or however it is. So you never know how your content is going to help somebody else. So I always encourage people to go out there and make their own content. So that's it. And I know this is a long video. This is going to be longer than most of the videos, but I wanted to dive in and really cover what you can expect as an ethical hacker and what you need really at a technical and a soft skill level to be successful. So from here, we're going to go ahead and get right into the course. Next up is effective note keeping. We're going to talk about the importance of note keeping, what tools you should use to be keeping notes for this course, and then we're going to dive right into the technical concepts. So I'll catch you over in the next video. So before we begin in this course and we really start to dive in, it's important to cover one of the topics that I'm going to harp on the most, which is effective note keeping. If you're going to be successful in your career and you're going to be successful in this course, you really need to take good notes. Now, in this first video, I'm going to show you what my notebook kind of looks like, not only for my personal notebook, but as a notebook for an assessment and how I might take notes for an assessment. And then I'll also show you some note-keeping applications that I prefer or I've heard students prefer. In the second video, we're going to cover how to install one of the applications and another cool application used for taking screenshots. So let's take a look at my notebook first. So here is my notebook, and actually let's click over here. So this is my notebook, and you can see it's really long. It's got all kinds of stuff in here, and it's just something that I build upon. This one in particular is actually only geared towards Active Directory. So I have a few different notebooks. This one is Active Directory, and it's actually a few different courses that I've taken in the past that I've kind of put together. And then just for assessment work, etc., I just kind of have a little cheat sheet here. So I wanted to show you this one in particular because these were built off of courses, and you're going to be working through a course. So kind of just get an idea of how maybe to structure it. So here you can see I structured it, and I've got different modules here where, okay, module 1 might have had this email macro fundamentals. Module two here has all these different components to them, right? And we have our notes, then we have child notes, and even sub-children to those child notes. And I'll show you how to create that here in a second. But let's say, for example, enumeration, which is one of the most important things that you're going to cover in hacking. And we take a look at enumeration. You don't have to understand what any of this means here. But you could see if I want to look at a domain and I want to get the current domain that I'm on, here's the command I run. And here is a picture of what it looks like. And here's what comes back when you run that command. That's great. That's what I want to see. And I have a whole list of commands for all these in here, right? So if I'm confused on a assessment and I want to go and find a command that I'm not sure of, I can go to my little cheat sheet here. Now, again, this is really long, so you have to create your notes the way it really helps you. For a course, I think it's good to write it all out step by step like this, and then go back and make a cheat sheet. I don't need these pictures anymore. I've been doing this for a while. So maybe I just say, hey, get current domain is get net domain. And then I say, hey, okay, get object of another domain. Here's an example of it. I don't need the pictures because it makes it really long. But as an example, and over time, you learn with the pictures as well. At least I do. So let's build from that. Here is an example of an actual assessment that I did for a client. And you can see how I did this. Now, I did an external, internal, and web application assessment for this client, and these were the findings. Now, I'm only going to show you what is masked or obfuscated already or doesn't reveal client information. But as you can see here, one example is on the internal, they had something called SMB signing disabled. You don't need to worry about it. But here in my picture, I've got a nice picture. The picture has highlighted, it says, hey, message signing disabled. That signifies SMB signing's disabled. And it has the IP address. So we identified the machine and we get proof of concept that this SMB signing is disabled here. Another example, MS17010. These are both internal exploits that you're going to encounter in this course. Here's one. I checked this machine. It says, hey, this target's not patched. Now, this is one I didn't exploit, but it shows that it's actually vulnerable to this attack. So these are a couple screenshots that I'll put. Now, your notes could be different than mine. How I organize is I take a screenshot, I put it in here, and then I make sure that I have at least the IP address and the screenshot for reference because I'll remember it. But if you need to go in here and take detailed notes, that's absolutely fine as well. You always want good notes for your assessments because you never know if a client's going to come back in 6 months or even a year and say, hey, what was that one thing that you did here? And if you go back to your notes, you say, oh, I did this. And some people get down really into the weeds. They have dates, times, everything for step-by-step what they do on an assessment. And that's completely up to you and how well you take your notes. This is kind of how I lay it out. And then you see the green check marks next to it. I add those green check marks when I'm doing my report. So as I'm building my report out and I cover something in the report, I'll just go ahead and right click and I'll change the note icon to a check mark, meaning that I've written that part of the report for that finding. And we just kind of go through over time. So with that being said, I do want to show you some decent applications. The one that I'm using here and that you see is called KeepNote. Now I run on Windows as a base. So keepnote.org, that's how you get KeepNote. It is for Linux, it is for Mac OS X, but this is totally a preference thing. Me, I prefer it. I've been using it for a long time. Some people don't like it, okay? So I'm going to offer some alternatives as well. Cherry Tree comes built into Kali Linux, as you're going to see here in just a little bit. Worth looking at, worth trying, seeing if you like it. OneNote's another example if you use Microsoft. And if you're a Mac user, a lot of students have told me that Joplin is really good. Now, I've never used this, but I keep hearing great things about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of these into the course resources, and you'll be able to look at them, download them, decide on your own. Now, you're not limited to these 4 note-keeping applications by any means. Feel free to use whatever you like to take notes. If you want pen and paper, that's great as well. And so just make sure that you're taking good notes. And we're gonna harp on this throughout the entire course over and over and over again. So make sure you're taking good notes. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're going to install KeepNote in the next video, and we're gonna install an awesome tool called GreenShot. And I'm gonna show you what GreenShot does and why it's so cool. And I cannot live on any assessment without it. So let's catch you over in the next video when we work on installing those tools. All right, so in that example in the last video, we talked about using Keep Note. So if you go to Google and you type in Keep Note, all you gotta do is come here, and Keep Note works on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. So great tool. The only issue with this tool is it has not been updated in a long time. Some people find issue with that. If you're one of those people, I'm actually not, you can use other tools. OneNote is an option. Cherry Tree is also an option. You can also find other options out there for you. If you have a favorite note-taking tool already, that's absolutely fine as well. Just make sure to take good notes, especially during this course, and make the most of it. Learn all the things that you can and incorporate that. So I will show you quickly how to install Keep Note here. And another thing to note too is while we do this is Cherry Tree is available on Kali Linux. We're going to install Kali Linux here very soon. So once we install Kali Linux and we get into the introductory Linux and we explore it, I'll show you a little bit more of Cherry Tree and what that looks like when we get there. So here we go. If you are on Windows, you can follow along, or you download your appropriate one here, depending if you're on Linux or if you need Mac as well. So I'm going to go ahead and install the exe, and I'm just going to actually run this. We're just going to say yes, and I'm going to say next, install. And that's it. I mean, it's that quick. And then we just launch Keep Note, and here you go. We've got Keep Note. So the other tool, the really cool tool that I love, this one is called Greenshot. Now this is a screenshot capturing tool. So let's go to downloads here on Greenshot. If you are running on something other than Windows, or Windows or Mac, so basically Linux, you're going to need a different tool. The recommended tool that I have heard out there is called Flameshot, Flame. Though I have no experience with it, I've heard it is identical to Greenshot. So here I'm going to download the latest stable. I'm going to select run. Yes. Okay. Accept the agreement. Give away our firstborn. Next. Place it however you want. I'm just going to next through everything, and I'm going to start Greenshot with Windows Start. That is my preference. I love this tool again. So it's finished. All right, let's take a look at it. So it should be running. Let's start Greenshot now. Okay, now you see it running down here on the bottom. Okay, let's go. Let's open up a web page. Let's say we want to take a screenshot of something. Now you just hit your print screen button, and this nice cursor gets brought up here. And let's say we wanted to take this downloads part right here. We're just going to capture this. And now we have choices. We can just save the image that we just grabbed. Or my favorite is that we can actually just open in an image editor, right? So let's open this in their image editor. Look at this. Okay, so here's the picture we just grabbed, right? On top of this, really great tools. Let me show you two that I use always. So I come into effects, I put a border on it. Let's say that you have like a Kali Linux, and Kali Linux, if you've never used it, has a black terminal. It's really nasty. So let's imagine here that it's black. It's nasty when it comes to reporting. So let's imagine that we're in this situation and we're writing a report and we've got this black background similar to this. Well, you can see what I just did. I just inverted it. And I do this for all of my reports. I invert the Kali background. So that way it's white. And that way it looks nice on a report. And when we get into the reporting, you'll kind of see what that looks like. But I like a nice clean background. It saves on ink as well if they were to print it. And it's just nice and neat when you give it to a client. So I always invert my images if I need to. You've got the black border here. Another thing is, let's say you want to point something out. You saw in my Keep Note notebook that I had a highlight. You can just click that button up here and just highlight something, like right here. Great. Another tool that's in here is this obfuscate. So let's say that there's like a password or something really sensitive in here that you don't want the client to see, or you don't want to reveal on a final report. You can do that, and then you can just like up the pixel size on this and make it really blurry, you know? So it's a really great tool. And then when you're done, you can copy it to your clipboard, you can save the file. I just usually like copy this, and if I want to go paste it, like, you know, make a new notebook or whatever, I'll just paste it in my Keep Note and just kind of go from there. So again, fantastic tool, awesome to use. If I had two recommendations for your note keeping, it's Keep Note and Greenshot. If I had to make one recommendation out of the two, it's absolutely Greenshot. You can be flexible on your note keeping tool. So again, hopefully this helps you. Again, please do take good notes of this course. you're going to find yourself wanting to know, hey, what was that command I ran again? And because we're going to go through so much stuff by the time this is all said and done that you're going to want to remember it. So please take good notes. So from here, let's go ahead and move on into our networking refresher, and we'll catch you in the next video. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this section on networking. So this section is titled Networking Refresher, meaning that some of you might have a networking background. And if you're looking at this list that's on the screen and you go down the list and you say, yep, I know all those, you can feel free to skip this section. If you've taken some of these in the past and you just might want a little bit of a refresher on them, then this section is for you. We're going to cover these topics not totally in depth, but we're going to use it as a way to brush up. And then we'll hit on networking again when we get into introductory Linux. So if you are unfamiliar with things like TCP, UDP, and the three-way handshake, or if your subnetting is a little shaky or you don't know what the OSI model is, chances are you should probably stick around and just click through this series, watch it, and build that foundation. Remember, we talked about one of the core foundations of pen testing being a strong networking background. This is a good way to build it up, remember what you might have forgotten, and go from there. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the first video, which is going to be IP addresses. What's up, everybody? So I'm going to preface this video really quick with that it is raining pretty hard here. So if the soothing sounds of the rain put you to sleep during this video and you can hear it, I'm very, very sorry, but the show must go on. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about IP addresses. Now, if you've ever used a computer before and you're anywhat familiar with IT, you probably know what an IP address is. But I want to take this a little bit deeper in theory on why we use IP addresses, what types of IP addresses are out there, and talk more about protocols and how IP addresses are actually designed and made up. So I'm here in a Kali terminal, and I'm just going to type in a simple command, and that command is ifconfig. Now, if you've used Linux before, this might be familiar to you. If you used Windows, it's similar to ipconfig. All I'm trying to do is bring up my IP address. So what we can see here is that we have an IP address, which is our inet. This is my IP address here. I also have another IP address, this inet6. This is what's called an IPv6 address. So we've got this inet, which is considered an IPv4, and this inet6, which is considered an IPv6. Now you can notice right away that there's two different types of notations for these. This inet here is in a decimal notation, and the IPv6 is in a hexadecimal notation. We'll get to the importance of that in just a second. So when it comes to IP addresses, this looks probably pretty familiar to us. This is an IP address. This is how we communicate. We communicate over layer 3. And you're going to hear me talking about layers repeatedly throughout the course, or at least throughout this part of the course, so that we can get familiar with how we're actually doing this. So I want you to be familiar with troubleshooting these layers, and these layers all refer to something called the OSI model. So when we talk about layers, we think about the OSI model, and I'll introduce the OSI model here in a few videos, and it should all click once I introduce the OSI model. So if I brought in the OSI model up front, it might be boring, might not make sense. So I'm going to introduce the OSI model near the end, and you're going to say, hey, yeah, that all makes sense. So what we've got here is we've got this IPv4 address, and this is the most commonly used format that we use today, right? We use IPv4 for mostly everything. And again, this is in that decimal notation. So when we see this decimal notation, it's just realistically a bunch of ones and zeros that are put together so that we have this human readable format. Realistically, all we're seeing here with 192, this first section here, this first octet, is actually just a bunch of ones and zeros. It's 8 bits. So we've got a range of 8 ones and zeros here. We've got another 8 here, and 8 here. So when it's all said and done, this inet, or this IPv4, is made up of 32 bits, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 here, and which equals 4 bytes. So another way to think about that is to think about it as, say, something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, period. Okay, that is one section there. So we've got 8 ones that can make up this, and then we'd have another 8, etc. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. But I do want to give you guys another example. So if we go into our applications and we go to a text editor really quick. So the way this looks is something like this. We start with a number like 128. I'm going to try to space this out as best as possible. And all I like to do is think of 128 as my base. And this will make a lot more sense when we get into subnetting. So please, if you're confused by this, don't worry. This is all theory right now. When we get into subnetting and we get hands-on, it'll make a lot more sense, I promise you. So let's say we have ones and zeros here. If we have a 1 for each of these sections, and I'm going to space this out again as best as possible, it's not pretty. But if we have a 1 for all of these, this equals 255. Why does this equal 255? Well, you take this, and all these numbers add up. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8, all this adds up to 255. So let's say if we didn't have all ones and zeros, we had just some ones enabled, like these last 3 here. Okay, well, this would equal 7, because we have 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. So our first number, or whatever number this applied to in the octet, would be 7. So if we had 7.7.7.7, it would just be this numbers repeating over and over. These numbers repeating over and over, right? So be 0.0001111 dot 0.0001111, and so forth. So this is kind of what it looks like behind the scenes, because again, a computer is just ones and zeros. We're all binary. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this out, and we're going to talk a little bit of other theory when it comes to this, and why INET or IPv6 and why IPv4. So let's close this and let's talk about IPv4. So I'm going to bring up a calculator. And with IPv4, we have these 32 bits. So what we could do is we could take 2 to the 32nd power. And this is the possible amount of IP addresses that we could have. So we have somewhere in the 4 billion range of IP addresses. Well, spoiler alert, we don't have only 4 billion people on Earth, right? We're up to 7-something billion at this point, and all these IP address spaces are gone. So IPv4 has been around since 1981. Nobody thought we were ever going to use all these addresses. Computers weren't really a thing. Who knew that we were going to want all these addresses? And these companies started buying them up, and they started buying them up in large chunks. And then they sold those to ISPs, and then ISPs sell those to you. And so these IP addresses have been gone for a very, very long time. And chances are when you have an IP address and you get this IPv4, you're only going to get one. If you're a corporation, you might buy more, but we've run out of IP address space. There's just not enough to go around. So the theory is, okay, let's come up with something different. Let's come up with IPv6. Now, this hexadecimal is actually in 128 bits, which makes things just a little bit longer and adds quite a bit. So let's take this 2 to the 128 power, and we get a number that I cannot tell you how to say, not even going to try. But I can guarantee you that in our lifetime, we will never use this address space. So we've come up with a solution of IPv6, but nobody really uses it. IPv6 is just a thing that's there, but when we get IPv6 addresses assigned, but still to this day, everybody's using IPv4. Well, how is that possible if we're using IPv4, but we're out of address space? Well, think about this. We're using something called NAT, which is Network Address Translation. Now, let's think about your network. So you might have a cell phone or computer or multiple devices. My network has at least 20 devices on it. I've got cameras. I've got multiple cell phones, smart TVs. Everything that connects to my internet gets an IP address. And that's 20 IP addresses right there, right? So let's say I have 20 devices. That's 20 IP addresses. Am I taking up 20 IP addresses out of that 4 billion? No. we're actually using something called network address translation, or it's called NAT for short. And we'll talk about this again when we set up our actual lab. But with NAT, what we're doing is we're assigning these private IP address spaces. So we've got this 192.168.57.139. Now, if you've ever seen a IP address before and you've been on a network, good chances are it probably started with 192, or maybe it started with a 10 dot or something along those lines. And that's because those are private IP addresses. So anything that starts with 192.168 is not an IP address that is going to be out in the interwebs. It is going to be an IP address that is only known to you. These are called private IP addresses. So because we use these private IP addresses, we can pass them out through what is called a public IP address. Now, to make better use of this, let's go out to Firefox, and I've already got a tab open. So I went to Google and I just said private IP addresses, and I clicked the second image here because I think it's a great image. So if we look at this, there are classes of IP addresses, private IPs. Now, there is a class D and E. We're not going to worry about those. The big three are class A, B, and C. If you know these, you are good to go. So if we look at class C, this is what the most common household and small business use. So we see it starts with the 192.168.0.0. So the 192.168 are constant. If you see a 192.168 address, you can guarantee yourself that that is a private IP address space. And then we have the range of changing this number between 0 and 255, and this number between 0 and 255. Why 0 to 255? Well, that'll all make sense when we get into subnetting. But what that allows us to do is have a large number of networks here and a small amount of hosts. But for a regular user like you or I, or a small business, 254 hosts is pretty good. I mean, I'm only using like 20 in my household. So the most common household is probably using this 192 address. But what about a big business, right? Something huge. Okay, well, they might use a 10 address because a 10 address frees you up to anything after this 10 is private. So 10.1, 10.1.1.1, whatever you want to put in here, up to 255 on each octet makes for a small amount of networks, but a large amount of hosts. Okay, and don't worry about the host versus network thing. Again, subnetting, we'll talk about that. It'll all make sense. But just imagine the amount of hosts that you can put in here with this wide range. So because of this, you'll see larger corporations using 10 addresses. You'll also see a lot of corporations, even small businesses, using 10 addresses. The matter of fact is, as long as you have this private IP address, you're good to communicate across your network. So any IP address outside of these and the loop back here are free game for the public address space. They're probably already owned, and you purchase those or rent those really from your ISP, your internet service provider. So going back to this thought, we have a class C address. My network's class C, 192.168.57.139 here. So it falls into that class C. I've got all these devices on this 192.168 network. All these devices are talking out of one IP address. That is my public IP address. That is what I rent from my ISP. And all of this network traffic goes out one IP. So this is how we have achieved or solved the issue of running out of address space without having to use IPv6. Not that there's anything wrong with IPv6. It's not pretty. I mean, it's way easier to type this stuff in than it would be to type something like this in. But at the same time, this is how we've solved it. We're able to still use IPv4 in mostly all networks, and we are able to communicate out with this quote unquote IP address shortage. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to build upon these concepts. Again, IPv4, IPv6 IP addresses are layer 3 protocols. Layer 3 is a router. So when we route traffic, we route via an IP address. So we're going to build upon that as well as we go in. Hopefully this is all just a refresher to you. So that is it for this video. I'll go ahead and catch you over in the next one. All right, so we're going to move down a layer here and talk about layer 2. So remember, IPv4, IPv6, IP addresses as a whole, that is layer 3. We're talking about routing. Here in layer 2, we're going to be talking about a MAC address or a physical address. Now, MAC stands for Media Access Control, and that is identified here in our ifconfig as this ether here. So we can think of this as our physical address and a way that we communicate when we are using switches. Switches communicate over this physical address. This is kind of how they know what device is what. So what we say here is if we have a device, say you just built a computer and you're installing your network interface card or your NIC, you're going to plug that in and you're going to have a MAC address for that NIC. Your cell phone, that's going to have a MAC address. Anything that's using a network interface is going to have a MAC address. So these MAC addresses are important because they utilize layer 2 or switching, and they are how we communicate over switches. Now, there's something to be noted briefly about MAC addresses. Now, MAC addresses have identifiers. So as you can see here, this MAC address has 6 different pairs of 2, right? And what we can do is we could take the first 3 pairs and we can just copy this and we can go out and we can try to put it into a MAC address lookup. Now for this one, this is just going to be VMware. I'm not sure if it's actually going to come up, but I'm going to go ahead and paste it and see what happens. And you can see that the vendor actually shows up as VMware. So the first 3 pairs here are identifiers, and we can identify what we're up against. If you've ever looked in your house and you've looked at your network and you're trying to find a device and you see the IP address, but the IP address doesn't really help you identify it. You might see something along the lines of a MAC address because your home device, say your router, might also be what's called a layer 2/layer 3 device, meaning it's doing switching and routing for you. And it'll also know the MAC address of that device. So you can take the first 3 pairs here, put those into the Google machine, and see if you can identify what that device is. So if I was unsure, this didn't have a host name or device name, and I could just reach out and say, okay, well, let me look these up. Maybe it'll give me an inkling. It's not going to tell me the exact device, but if I know it's running VMware, then I can say, oh, that's my host machine running. Or if it's related to like Texas Instruments or something, maybe I know that device in my house. So this is just a quick way to look up devices and know about them. The other option or other thing that you need to know here is just that, again, MAC addresses, layer 2, related to switching. I'm just trying to repeat this and get this into your head. So that's all we need to know from this lesson. And we're going to go ahead and I'll catch you over in the next lesson. All right, so now we're moving into layer 4, which is the transport layer of the OSI model. And we're going to talk about what is TCP and what is UDP. So we'll type that in here, TCP versus UDP. So TCP is what is known as the Transmission Control Protocol. And you could think of that as a connection-oriented protocol. And we also have UDP, which is the User Datagram Protocol. And this is a connectionless protocol. So when we have these 2 protocols, one is best suited when it comes to high reliability. That's TCP. TCP is connection-oriented. We want to make a connection, we need high reliability. So you can think of something like a website, which is HTTP or HTTPS, or you can think of something like SSH or FTP, the file transfer protocol. Those all utilize TCP. When you think about UDP, you might think about something like a streaming service, that's connectionless, or DNS is connectionless, or voice over IP is connectionless. And when this comes into the importance of scanning is super important. We're going to be scanning both TCP and UDP as a penetration tester. And don't worry about scanning right now. When we get into the scanning section, this will make a lot more sense. But we need to know what TCP and UDP are and define them broadly. So the most commonly used protocol that you're going to be scanning is going to be TCP. Now, TCP works on what is called a 3-way handshake. Now, if we look at the three-way handshake, it's going to look something like this. We're going to first send out a SYN packet, and then we're going to receive back a SYN ACK packet. And finally, we're going to send an ACK packet. Now, how does this work? Now, you could think of this as an interaction. So let's say you have a friend or a neighbor, and you go to your neighbor and you say hello. That's a SYN. Now, SYN ACK is going to be the response. It's going to say, hey, SYN, I acknowledge you. That's your neighbor waving hello back. And then you know you are good to go start a conversation. So that's the acknowledgement. Now, when we think about this in the terms of ports, now port is a item that can be opened on a machine. It's a way to communicate with certain protocols. For example, if you think about HTTP, that's over port 80. If you think about HTTPS, that's over port 443. There's a lot of different protocols, and there are 65,000 plus ports that can utilize these protocols. So everything related here has to do with these ports. Now, let's say that you want to connect to port 443 on a website. You're going to send out a SYN packet to that website. You're going to say, hey, I want to connect to you on port 443. And if 443 is open and available for connection, they're going to say, hey, you can go ahead and connect to me. And when you want to actually establish that connection, you're going to send that acknowledgement packet back. Now, let's make more sense of this. Let's go ahead and open up a tool called Wireshark. So this is built into Kali Linux. I'm just going to type in Wireshark, and I'm going to provide an ampersand here just so I have shell access if I need it in the background. And all I'm going to do is capture packet data. So this is going to be listening in on my NIC, and it's going to say, hey, what's he doing? Let's capture all that data. So we're going to capture that. I'm going to start a capture here. You're going to start to see a bunch of traffic coming through. You can see the different protocols here. You can see UDPs coming through right now. But we're going to go establish a TCP connection. So let's go out to the World Wide Web. And I've got Google up. I'm just going to refresh Google. You're going to see a lot of traffic start coming through. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop this right here. Look at all the data packets that get sent when you're using your computer. This is what's going on in the background. You don't even think about it. So we could see some syntax there. Those are in the gray. Let's see if we can find a good one. Okay, so here is one right here. So what we're going to do, actually, let's find a better one. So we're going to come down to here, and we're going to say, okay, so here we are. We're our source IP. This is 192.168.57.139. We're going out to destination of 74.125.21.155. We're saying, hey, I've got this port here. I want to connect to your port. So port 443, this is a web page. We're sending a SYN packet. If that port is open and available for connection and communication, what's going to happen back is that IP address is going to say, hey, here I am. I'll allow you to connect on this port. And if we make that final connection, we're going to go ahead and send the ACK packet back, which is right here. It's going to say ACK. So that is the three-way handshake. Please do remember this is going to come back into play when we get into scanning, and we'll talk about stealth scanning and how we modify the three-way handshake to actually do some scanning. So that is it for this lesson. I will catch you over in the next one. All right, so before we go into the OSI model, I do want to talk about some common ports and protocols. Since this is a refresher, most of these should be pretty familiar to you. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly and just talk about them briefly on each of these common ports. And the reason I've listed these is because there are things that we'll see quite often as a penetration tester. And it's just something that as we're going through the course, if one of these show up, it's something that just rings a bell, and you see a scan, it comes back and you see port 21, you just think, ah, yes, FTP. Or you see port 80, you think, ah, yes, HTTP. So you got to start training your mind to memorizing these ports. So when we get into our scanning, which again, we haven't covered scanning, but when we get there and we see what ports are open on a machine, we're going to be able to have these common ports memorized. So on the TCP side, we've got FTP. FTP is the file transfer protocol. You're going to see this in some assessments. You're going to see this a lot when we do something called capture the flag, where we run through some test machines. You'll see FTP open quite a bit. So FTP, file transfer protocol, all that means is we can log into this server, we can put a file, or we can get a file off the server. Now, SSH and Telnet kind of play hand in hand. Telnet is the ability to log into a machine remotely. Now, SSH does the same thing. The only difference is SSH is the encrypted version of that. So with Telnet, you are in clear text, and with SSH, you are encrypted. Now, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP all relate to mail. We're not going to worry too much about mail in this course, but you might see it come back up at some point. So just remember your 25, 110, and 143. DNS. So DNS is a way to resolve IP addresses to names. And we could take a quick look at that if we go back to our Kali machine and say we're at Google here. We've got Google up, but the computer doesn't really know what Google is. The computer is just using nice text like google.com for us, the humans. What's going on the back end is Google actually resolves to an IP address. Now, that IP address is how the computer knows to get back and forth. Because we don't want to sit there and type in IP addresses, this DNS or domain name system has been implemented for us. So we type in google.com. On the back end, it knows, hey, I want to go out to 179.10.22.34, whatever it is in reality. But this is just a quick way for the computer to relate to a human and the human to, easily readable access to some of this stuff. So going back to our PowerPoint, we have HTTP and HTTPS. That is a website, just what you saw there. Mostly everything is on 443 now, or HTTPS. The HTTP on port 80, you'll see sometimes, remember that is the non-secure version of the protocol. So HTTPS is encrypted, HTTP is not encrypted and not secure. So lastly, SMB ports 139 and 445. Originally, it was just 139. In the later versions of Windows, they've put on 445. You're going to see these ports a lot. This is probably the most common port you're going to see as a pen tester. These relate to file shares. You might also hear this called Samba. So there are a few names for it, but when you think of SMB and you see 139 or 445, think of file shares. And as a pen tester perspective, you got to think about all the crazy exploits we've had regarding SMB. The most recent one as of this course was the WannaCry virus, right? So you had the WannaCry virus. It's also known as Eternal Blue, was what it was built off of, or MS17010, official term of that exploit. That exploit utilized an SMB exploit to navigate through networks. So it became very vicious very quick because SMB is open so frequently on networks. Now, on the UDP side, we also have DNS over here. DNS is both a TCP and UDP protocol. We also have DHCP. Now, when it comes to IP addresses, DHCP associates you with an IP address kind of at random. Now, you could have the opposite of that is what is a static IP address. So with DHCP, you plug into your network, say your home network, and the internet just fires up. Guess what? Probably DHCP on the back end. It just picks a number between a range, says, hey, here's your IP address. I'm going to let you lease that out for 8 hours or a day or a week or however long the timing is set for, and that IP address is yours. Now, the opposite of that, again, is static. So you could say, hey, I want a static IP address, and anytime I plug in with this specific computer, go ahead and give it this IP address. So how are we going to know that? Most likely the MAC address, right? So from layer 2, it's going to know layer 3 and how to assign it. So again, DHCP should be pretty familiar to you. We've also got TFTP on port 69, which is the trivial FTP, and it utilizes UDP instead of TCP. And we also have SNMP, which is the Simple Network Management Protocol. So you will encounter SNMP occasionally on networks, not always, but when we do encounter it, there may be some information to be gathered, especially if there are strings being used that are community or public strings. And we'll worry about that when we encounter it, but you will probably see it again in this course. So that is it in this video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the OSI model and tie all this together. Then we'll get into a little bit of subnetting, and we'll end this with a refresher on networking, a final video on networking. So I'll see you over in the next video. All right, so this whole time we've been talking about networking, and I've been throwing terms at you, and every time I throw a term at you, I try to use the respective layer for it. So you've heard me say layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and those all correspond with what is called the OSI model. Now, if you're ever in a network interview, or if you're ever talking to somebody who has experience in networking, or even if you're on the help desk taking tickets, knowing the OSI model is incredibly helpful. And people will just throw layers at you, especially the people who have been in the field for quite some time, might just say layer 2 instead of a switch, or they might say layer 3 instead of a router. So I'm going to discuss the OSI model really quickly, give you a mnemonic on how to remember it, and just talk about some of the concepts within it and how to troubleshoot down it as well. So I picked this up from Keith Barker a long time ago. Great trainer, by the way. And this is the mnemonic. So we're going to go P, D, N, T, S, P, A. And this stands in my head for please do not throw sausage pizza away. Again, that is please do not throw sausage pizza away. So I'm going to put numbers corresponding to the layers in front of it here. And we're going to go ahead and type these out one by one. So on the first layer here, we've got what is called the physical layer. And you could think of your physical layer as like data cables, or like your Cat6 cables, stuff like that. Something you might plug in, right? That is the physical layer. And we've already talked about layer 2 quite a bit. Layer 2 is the data layer, and that is our switching, right? And also our MAC addresses. Going down the list, we've got the network layer, which is IP addresses. Also routing. The fourth layer is the transport layer, which is TCP, UDP, which we have talked about as well. And the last few, so the session layer. We've got the session layer, which is just session management. You don't really have to worry too much about this one. 6 is the presentation layer. Now, this should be familiar to you because think about WMV, JPEG, movie files. That's what your presentation layer is. So media. And then lastly, we've got the application layer, which is like HTTP, SMTP, your applications that you utilize, right? So we've got this laid out here, and you might be asking, why is this important? Well, again, when we say something like, my home router is a layer 2-3, so that means it does switching and it does routing, right? You might think of this in another way as well. You might be asked to troubleshoot. And something to talk about too with the OSI model is when we receive data down this physical layer all the way down to the application. When we transmit data, it goes out the application layer down to the physical. When we're troubleshooting this, it is always best to start with the physical and go down to the application level. Okay, so say you're working help desk and you get a phone call and somebody says, my internet's not working, help me. Well, what's the first thing you're going to do? Are you going to ask them application level questions? Yeah, probably not. You might say, hey, can you look at the back of the computer? Do you see the cable plugged in? Oh, the cable's plugged in. Okay, well, do you see the where the cable's plugged in? Is there a blinking light? Is that blinking light green by chance? Okay, we're checking the NIC, right? And then we might ask them to, do they have an IP address? What's going on? All the way down. And then we troubleshoot all the way down to layer 7. So we wouldn't start on layer 7, right? We would start from the basics and move down. So it's important to know this. This isn't a help desk course by any means, but it's super important to know this, especially if it's been a while since you've seen this network stuff, or even if this is new to you, that the OSI model is commonly referred to. Even as a pen tester, I get all kinds of layer 2, layer 3 talk, and you will be sitting in meetings with network engineers, with people who are very, very smart about this stuff, and they're going to throw all this lingo at you. So if you know this lingo, really, really benefits you, or else you're just going to sit there and wonder what the heck they're talking about. So hopefully this is a quick, informative method for you. And again, remember, please do not throw sausage pizza away. That's the easiest way that I remember it. You can make up your own mnemonics if you want. People have other things as well. If you've got a favorite mnemonic, please feel free to comment down below and tell me your mnemonic as well. So I'd love to hear some of these other ones. So let's go ahead and move on into subnetting, and then we'll start moving into other fun parts of the course. Let's talk about subnetting. So subnetting is important in networking. You hear about it all the time. You hear even people perhaps freaking out. I know I freaked out when I heard that I had to do it for exams like Network Plus or CCNA. And I feel like there are a lot of complicated methods out there for subnetting, but there was a method that was shown to me middle of my career, and it just blew my mind. It's really, really fast subnetting method. And I really want to break down for you what subnetting is, why we do it, and then show you the methodology behind it. So if we want to talk about subnetting, if we just come in here and just do an ifconfig, and we look at our IP address, right? We have our inet, which is our IPv4. And you can see here too, we have this net mask. This is also known as a subnet mask or a subnet. And it just says 255.255.255.0. Doesn't really tell us a lot if we don't know much about it, but this is what a subnet looks like. And we can think of subnets in ones and zeros. It's all bits, right? So we've got 8 bits here, just like an IP address, IPv4, same thing. 8 bits, 8 bits, 8 bits, and another 8 bits. And we've got ones and zeros. If all the ones are switched on, we've got 255. If none of the ones are switched on, we've got 0. And depending on how those ones and zeros are switched on or off determines a lot of things for us. And that's why this net mask is important. Now, attached to your resources for this course, I've created an Excel sheet that I think will be useful. So if we look at the Excel sheet, here is the CyberMentor's subnetting sheet. And let's talk through this. It looks like a bunch of numbers and it might look crazy for you. And we're going to talk about how this breaks down, how the bits break down, and then how I would write this shorthanded for an exam or a test or just something that I do on a day-to-day basis. So first, let's talk about the bits. So come to the bits tab here, and we have our 8 bits, right? We can count this across, and there's 8 here on the count. You can see that. And it starts with 128 and descends down to 1. You just keep cutting it in half, right? So 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, whatever. What's more important is why we get to these numbers. So if we have a 1 switched on here, it adds to the value. When all the ones are switched on, it equals to 255. You see all the ones switched on here. If we were to highlight over all this, come down to the sum, you see the sum is 255. That's all this formula is doing here. So if we were to come through and you see all the zeros here, nothing's flipped on to actually turn any value on here. How this actually works is the switch has to be on in order, right? So if we were to switch on another bit, we'd have to switch it on here. And we'd have to switch another one on here. We couldn't just come down here and switch it on here. It wouldn't make sense. It doesn't work that way, not with subnetting. So we're going to take these back off and just show zeros again. But you see how the values change. If, for example, we had this network and you saw the default, and I'm showing you the 255, 255, 2550, the standard here, because that is what's known as a /24 network. That's very, very common. And it's very common because it's used mostly in households and small businesses. And it's done this way because of the amount of hosts that it allows. Now, if we talk about the host, you can see that I have here 2 to the 8th power. Why do I have that? Well, we actually go by how many bits are switched off or how many hosts are available to us. So if a host here or a bit was switched on, then we lose the amount of hosts we have available to us. And this subnet gets smaller and smaller. Now, don't worry too much about the ones and zeros. It's going to make a lot more sense when we stop talking in these binary terms. I just kind of want to break down the math behind it first before we make it really, really simplistic. So again, we're talking about what's called this /24 or WAC24 network. And it's so standard because of the host. Again, 256. Think of all the devices in your house. You have cell phones, you probably have computers, you might have like a Roku or Amazon Fire or something along those lines. You might have smart TVs or smart watches or something that connects to the internet. Well, again, they're all connecting through NAT, right, and going out, but the amount of hosts that you can have on your private network really depends on the subnet mask and how you set it. So we have this class C that you saw before, the 192.168.1 or .0 or however you want to have it, right? Well, it allows us to have 256 when we have a subnet of /24. So that's very common for a household. It's also common for a small business. Maybe there's a printer, some few devices in there, but they're never going to get over this 256 hosts. Okay. So when we come to the subnet cheat sheet, let's break this down a little bit differently. So we have our host here. Let's start with the /24 where we just were. And you saw that there is 256 available hosts as we start turning off bits. Okay, we turn off a bit here, we turn off a bit, keep going down the list. The hosts start getting bigger, and that just corresponds here. We have a /24, and the only reason I'm saying 24 is I'm counting the ones across, right? So we got 24 bits switched on. If we had 23, okay, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, let's stay away from the ones and zeros. I think it's a little bit complicated. The better way to think about this is to look at, and I'm going to replicate this, and then we're going to come back to it. So what I do here is we can have a possibility of 32 bits switched on, right? So I'm just making a new tab, and I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to hit Control and drag this across till it hits 8. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with 9. I'm going to drag it across. All I'm doing is just making, really quickly, 32 placeholders. And I'm just emulating here if we had the possibility of 32 different switched on bits. So imagine one bit is switched on. Imagine all 32 bits are switched on. That's the possibilities here, right? So always, for sure, we're going to have an amount of hosts, and we're going to have a subnet mask, okay? So we'll just call it subnet there. We always start here with 128, just like the bits that you saw. You saw the 128 start on the bits. Let's just start also with 128. Now, as you saw, every bit that's switched on, remember when we switch a bit on over here, it starts decreasing. So we're going to decrease for the bits that are switched on. 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. You come over here, and what I like to actually do is I like to just add these numbers together. And you can see 128 and 64 is 192. And then you can add these two together. So you get 192, 32. You just add diagonally is the way I actually always do it. So 224, 240, 248, 252, 254, and 255. Now, what does that correspond to? It corresponds to the possibilities of the bits being flipped on, right? So this looks just like what you see here. Same deal. And if you had a 1 underneath of it, okay, then you got 128. If you've got another 1 underneath of it, well, guess what? You've got 128 plus 64, which is 192. And this number keeps growing. Why is this important? This is still all ones and zeros, right? Well, let's start thinking about it. If we have a /24 network, we've got 24 bits turned on. Our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. If we had a /16, it becomes 255.255.0.0. Why? Where are these changes coming from? Let me show you this. Okay, for a /8, I'm just tying this into just this right here. Well, this is coming from the number of bits that are turned on. 8 bits turned on, we've got 255, and the rest are zeros. You got another 8 bits turned on, 255, 255, the rest are zeros. Come down to this /24, which is that really common subnet that you see, and you've got 255, 255, 255, 0. Now, this is very common, okay? And let's go back to the cheat sheet now. And you can see that I've got X as a placeholder in the subnet. So what I'm saying here is you look at this list and you say, I've got a /1. Well, for this whole area here from 1 to 8, the placeholder is going to hold in place of this X. So for a /1, if I've got 128, then guess what? It's going to become 128.0.0.0 because that's how it would be. And if you turned on just one bit here and made all of these zeros, guess what? Just the 128 would be on, the rest would be zeros. Okay, if we had a /14, okay, so 255's automatically flipped on. You have a /8 already, you passed through it. Okay, so you're starting on the second iteration here. /14 corresponds down here to 252. So you'd have a 255.252.0.0. So all this is placeholders. Let's go back to the sheet here. So I make this quick and dirty list. This is what I write out when I'm just writing out something quick for an exam. I'll write out 1 through 32. I'll put the host here, and I'll put the subnet here. So again, if we know that once we cross through 8, 16, 24, 32, that it has a 255 in front of it, all we've got to do then is we'll say /27. Well, we've come through 3 columns. Then I know for sure that we've got 255.255.255. something, right? You see the /27, you come down here, the subnet would be 224. Say 28. Okay, 255, 255, 255. Look at the 28, you've got a .240. And this is going to be confusing. Subnetting is not necessarily easy. Once you get the chart down, it makes a lot more sense. So let's start piecing some more things together. When I say that I've got hosts, now the hosts that I'm showing you only correspond to these first rows, but it's very common or very useful just to know this number right off the bat. Now, if you look at the cheat sheet, what you can do here is you just know that you start with a 1 or you start with the 128 and you go down, but every time you go up, you're doubling. And why are we doubling? Do you remember from the bits part? Every time a bit is turned off, so as we go up a number, we take it to the next power. So we've got 8 bits turned off. We take 2 to the 8th power. It's 256. Well, here you go. Look. Come through here, 256. We go to the 9th power, 512, to the 10th power, 1024. It just keeps doubling, okay? That's all you got to think about in your mind, is it keeps doubling. So on an exam, for example, you might have something like, how many hosts could be potentially in a /20 network? And you come to your cheat sheet that you made or you have in your head and you say, well, 496, and then we'll get to this in a minute, but we have to subtract 2. So 494 potential. And why is this all important? What do we even care about any of this? Why am I rambling on? Well, you need to know based on the network. Okay, the /24 is great for a small office, home network, however you want to have it. But what if you're a large enterprise? Maybe you have thousands of devices, okay? Maybe you want a /16 network. That might make more sense for you. Or you even see some with a /8 network. It just depends on how big the company is. The larger the company, the greater chance that you're going to see that they're not using /24. Or they could even have subnetted segments of their network where, say, they have just telephones and they've got 500 employees and 500 telephones. They might just have one /23 network for nothing but telephones because that's the amount of hosts that fit in there. So what we're after with subnetting is how many hosts can we fit and what is the mask that's behind it? So those are questions you might be asked in an exam, and these are questions that you're just going to see. And when you're given addresses, say you're doing a pen test for a client, you might be given something like this. You might be given an IP address 192.168.1.0/24. Okay, and immediately in your head, you're like, oh, /24, that's standard. There could be up to 256 hosts or 254 hosts or devices in this network. But if they gave you something like 192.168.1.0/20, then you might look at your little chart and say 4,094 hosts. Remember, we're going to subtract 2. 4,094 hosts in this network. Now I know if I'm scanning this, I'm up against a lot more devices potentially than I am in this. Okay, so when a client gives you your subnets, they might just write it out like this. And depending how big your client is, might depend on how big their subnets are for you. For example, I just pen tested a client that was a /16 all the way across. And it looks something like 10.1.0.0/16. Okay, and your subnet mask for that would be something like 255.255.0.0. And how does this come into play? Well, every time you have a 255, that number's locked in place. That's another way to think about this. So that 10 is always locked down. This 1 is always locked down. The rest of the bits are fair game, meaning we could have 10.1.1.0.1.2.3. We could actually have a 0 here, 0.1.2.3.4. And that's how this number for like a /16 gets so big, because you have 10.1.0.0 through 255 on the possibilities, which equals 256 hosts. Okay, for one range, you get 256. Well, imagine you have to do that 255 other times, right? And that number gets substantially bigger here. And then if you were to have a /8, then of course it gets bigger and bigger. So what you need to realize are a few things here. We have these addresses, and you see the /1, /8. Again, we call them WACs. WAC 24 is going to be very common. I would say WAC 16 is probably your next common. You might see some weird subnetted networks like this, but typically it's /24, /16. Now, your network ID is typically what is known as your first address, and your broadcast ID is known as your last address. This is not always the case, but it is very common. And let me log back into this Kali machine here, and I'll show you. So we have our IP address, 192.168.57.139. And we've got a net mask of 255.255.255.0. What does that tell you from what we just learned? That tells you we have a /24 network. Okay, this is a common network. There are potentially 254 hosts. Why do I keep saying that? Why do I keep subtracting 2? Well, we've got a network ID and a broadcast ID, or broadcast IP here. Well, what we need to know is we are .139. We could be anywhere from .1 to .254 within this network. That's our 254 possibilities. This 0 means we have the flexibility to be any IP address range from 1 to 254. Usually a .0 for this IP here and a .255 make up your network ID and your broadcast IP, okay, usually. So if we were to say something along the lines of, let's go back to this Excel document, and we were to say something along the lines of this. Let's say that we have a /24 network, and we want to know how many hosts. We want to know what our network ID is and what our broadcast ID is, or IP is, okay? We would say, okay, and we'll give it one more. We'll say it's a /24, and the IP starts with 192.168.1.0, okay? Or we can even write it like this, 192.168.1.0/24, delete this, and we'll say, what's our subnet mask? What's our host? What's our network? What's our broadcast? So subnet, you come to your cheat sheet, you say, okay, /24, I already know that I need to be filling in this area here on the X. So I'm just going to come in 255, 255. What's the X? Well, we know to come down this row, 255 here, .0. Okay, and then we've got hosts. I'm just going to expand this a little bit. We've got the hosts. Okay, hosts are right here, 256 hosts. Potentially 254 though, because we always subtract 2 from the host total. So our network ID is usually the first address available to us, which is 192.168.1.0. The broadcast is 192.168.1.255, meaning available to us is anything from .1 to .254. Let's take a look at something else. That's a basic example. Let's do like a /28. Let's say we got 192.168.1.0/28. Now what? Well, we've got 16 hosts here. Okay, so our subnet is then going to fill in 255.255.255.x, right? Because we're in this row. /28 says it's going to be a 240 when we drop down to the subnet mask. I'm going to make this a little bigger. How many hosts? 16 minus 2. We have 14 hosts. Okay, so the first non-host would be 192.168.1.0. Again, still the same thing. First address. Last address is going to be what? 192.168.1.15. Does that make sense? 0 to 15 is 16 addresses. Usable space is 14 because we take out the network and the broadcast. Now, you could see something like this, and then guess what? You're segmented. So because you're only using this little bit of space, you can then in turn have something like this, 192.168.1.16/28. And then it starts the same way. Your subnet mask is actually the same because you're using a /28. You come through, you can just copy and paste that. The hosts are still the same. What changes here? Well, your first address, 192.168.1.16, and then your last address, which is 192.168.1.31. So because this is smaller on the /28 side, we can actually have multiple networks within, like, say, a .1, .0, .1.16, .1.32. You could have multiple little networks here with only a small amount of hosts. So maybe you have just a few servers in this range, and you have like servers A, B, and C